Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Jacob Shea. On today's episode, we will focus on his musical career, how Bleeding Fingers was established, and of course, his new score for the new BBC series Seven Worlds, One Planet. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate that. And Jacob, at first I would like you to tell me a bit about how you started out in this business and how your career came about.
Sure. Yeah, so I was kind of late to the realization that um you know uh, composition for media was such a cool and varied career. I grew up in San Jose, and um even though that's in California, and globally California is kind of known as a entertainment, hub. It really felt like a million miles away. And it wasn't really until my junior year of college at UC Santa Barbara that I realized that a lot of what was drawing me in when I was, either watching a movie or playing a video game, a lot of what was captivating me was this kind of, undercurrent of emotional underscore. And the first time it really became just uniquely striking was I had rented with I was on a family vacation, and my folks had rented 13 Conversations About One Thing, which is a kind of independent movie with John Turturro, a tremendous score by Alex Werman. And I just was blown away by the score, the kind of language that he was using harmonically, and just the colors that he was bringing out. And it provided this real identity that kind of fits so beautifully with the film. And so I reached out to him soon after I saw that movie, saying, I'm interested in what you do. I don't quite understand what you do, but I'm close enough to Los Angeles that I'm willing to find a place to stay over the summer, and just if I could hang with you and just see what it is that you do. And he was gracious enough to kind of provide me with a small stipend, and I worked for him for a summer. And that was it, really. I mean, it was like it was such a pivotal moment for me to see. Okay, you can use technology. I mean, I've always been kind of fascinated with technology, and maybe that's because I grew up in Silicon Valley. But you know, it it was just a revelation to know that you can manipulate these musical instruments in the form of samples to kind of, bend them to your will as much as you possibly can, to create anything that's in your head, and try and make it a reality, or at least kind of a facsimile of what it could be ultimately. And so I was, it was like a drug, and I was hooked. And my girlfriend in college, who later became my wife, she has roots in Los Angeles, and so she was coming back here anyway. And so when I graduated, I came down here and made a go of it, and assisted about, I'd say, half a dozen people in a 2-year period, while also scoring student films. And that culminated in me assisting a composer named Trevor Morris,
Yes.
who rented space at Hans Zimmer's Remote Control Productions. I worked tremendously hard, and it just didn't seem to be the right fit, and he was going to let me go. But Hans was, and still is, a night owl, and he kind of roams the halls of remote control at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and he saw me tinkering away on Giga Studio machines and being very diligent in my kind of pursuit of making this a career. And so when he found out that Trevor was no longer using my services, he hired me. And at the time, Henry Jackman and Lorne Balfe were staff writers for him, essentially. And so my first task was to basically be both of their assistants. And I jumped into the deep end, and I just hung on for dear life.
It's quite a story here for in terms of your first steps in the business. I mean, as an intern arranger and as an assistant. You just mentioned Henry Jackman, Lorne Balfe, but at some point you also worked with Elliot Goldenthal, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that was tremendous. I mean, he's one of my heroes.
Yes.
Musically, he's just so brilliant. And it was this weird situation where he was having a difficult time kind of getting his demos to be signed off on by Michael Mann. And Bob Badamy, who was at the time really Hans's main music editor, he kind of worked out a remote control in a roundabout way. He was just always around. And he was talking to Hans one night and saying, we just really have, we're having trouble getting Elliot's demos past Michael, and they shouldn't be having a difficult time because they're brilliant, and we just need to show them what it will be. And at the time, I had kind of, like I said, because of my technical background, I'd become really adept at manipulating samples, and Hans kind of took notice of that, and he offered me up as kind of like the mock-up guy of Elliot's work. Essentially, he would make a mock-up which already was brilliant. I didn't add any notes. It was literally me trying to imagine how an orchestra would perform it, and I had access to Hans's private sample library, which is even by today's standards still pretty remarkable. And so I was basically tasked with taking Elliot's compositions and performing them on the computer before they got to Michael Mann, and then that kind of smoothed over the process. And it was a great honor for me, because I just think Elliot Goldenthal is one of the best living composers, and so it was such a trip for me to actually be in his kind of solar system for a moment.
That must have been Public Enemies, right?
It was, yeah, it was Public Enemies, and it's a shame that some of that music that I mocked up didn't make it into the film, because it's still a fantastic score, but I just can't say I'm just gushing because I think he's amazing.
Yes.
Basically, there's about a half an hour of material that I programmed that didn't make it in, that I thought was just as brilliant as the stuff that did. Yeah, it was Public Enemies, and that was a real trip.
Yeah, I bet it was. I mean, and in terms of Michael Mann, I don't mean to dwell on the subject, but I've heard plenty of times it's pretty difficult to work with him and to please him, and he goes into multiple directions. And Elliot probably isn't the only one who went through that, so it's not a
what's interesting is that he, when I wound up, I'd heard all these tales of like, oh, watch out for Michael Mann. He's a very difficult guy, and I really didn't have. I mean, the small interactions I had with him, he didn't seem to be without vision. Like I think a lot of times when you hear horror stories, it's someone that doesn't really know what they want, and you're kind of like on the journey with them to discover what it is that they want, and it's just frustrating because you think you're getting somewhere, and you're on a track of progress, and then it just gets completely interrupted. Michael Mann, he seemed to know exactly what he wanted, and it was just a matter of finding the way to communicate. Like Elliot was on target the whole time, and it was literally, he seems to be very specific about how he likes to be presented with things sonically. He has his like a kind of reviewing room in his offices, and I think if things sound good in that room, he's kind of happy. And so once that part was put into play, and he was happy with the stuff that sounding right in his room, like the notes hadn't changed. It was just the performance of it was closer to what he had envisioned sounding in the final product.
It's a very difficult process, and I also believe, well, writing, of course, a very brilliant piece of music is one thing, and of course also the director has to respond to that. So sometimes, no matter how brilliant the piece of music is, the producer or the director just doesn't bite, for whatever reason. And
Sure.
and do you think that's selling yourself and your music is just as important, if not more so, than the actual composing process?
I think it's very tricky. What I've come to realize, and obviously this is just my own kind of, I haven't had enough of a career with as wide a breadth that I could say anything with any authority. But from my vantage point, what I've come to realize is that I really think there's just so many damn talented writers, like crazy talented. There are composers I listen to that are completely deserving of an illustrious career, and for one reason or another don't seem to eke it out, and it's certainly not because of their talent, because like there are people that can write circles around me, and some of the other people I'm familiar with that also have good careers. And I think it's what I've this is not my thought. I'm stealing it from John Powell. but but it's a good thought, and that is that you're not hired to write the best music. You're hired to write the best music for the thing you're hired to write for. And so it doesn't become like, can I just write something that's as brilliant as Prokofiev or Stravinsky, or has the staying power melodically as some things that Mozart or Beethoven have given us. But it's really about how do we, as a composer, put on our filmmaking hats and think about the story and augmenting that, and not being so concerned with how we come across musically to the kind of the elite musical critics. It's like, if you can do both, if you can write good music and also support the story, that's obviously the dream is
Yeah.
is to do something that you're very proud of. What I've found most rewarding as a composer in this field is having a director or a producer, whoever's come up with the vision, come to me at the end of it and say, God, the work you did really elevated and surpassed my expectations for what this thing could be. And that is the target, a lot more than writing a symphony that just happens to go hand in glove into the film. Also, it's like put away your ego about what you'd like other people to recognize that you're able to do, and
Yes.
and really focus on on what you can do to help the thing you've been hired to write music for succeed.
Yes, very true. And that's what makes it so tricky and also very suspenseful at the same time. You know, sometimes you come up with a very big symphonic score which you think serves the picture, and five people tell you, wow, that's gorgeous, that's brilliant, but an additional five people tell you, well, nah, that's not what we want. We want something simple or synthetic. And then, you know, you're basically you have to change everything on the fly and adapt. You know, that's what makes being a film composer so tricky and challenging.
Yeah, but also really, really refreshing. You know, if I think being asked to do a bunch of different things, like, you know, my background, I didn't grow up, even though I graduated from, you know, a very kind of rigorous music program as a composition major, a bachelor of music. I really only got into kind of the classical canon of works late in life, compared to most people that do this for a living. I'd say I really got into it in senior year of high school, taking an advanced placement music history or music theory course. And so my wheelhouse is like kind of this weird combination of highly melodic things that I just gravitate toward naturally to, and rock and roll, and jazz, and all these kind of myriad things that don't add up to a very seasoned concert composer. And what I love about this work is that I'm often asked to do things that I feel like, you know, might be easier for someone more learned, but I I love music with like a capital M, and really anything that there's good music and bad music. That's my only kind of differentiator. I'm not particularly tied to a genre, and care about it so deeply, you know, to the exclusion of others. And so anytime I'm asked to do something, I just think what a great opportunity to learn about a style, or learn how to kind of stretch my own understanding of music. And that keeps the job super refreshing. You know, it'd be terrible to like do the same thing day in and day out.
Yes.
And I mean, it wouldn't be terrible. You're still writing music for a living, for God's sakes. But I mean, how privileged is that to be able to do that? It's just it's a dream, really. But being a media composer and having someone say, yeah, I thought we really kind of wanted a traditional orchestral score here, but really we want three ukuleles and a cello playing pizzicato, and that's our palette. Um, and that challenges you to work within those constraints and come up with something that you feel serves the picture.
Jacob, before we dive right into Seven Worlds, One Planet, I would love to ask you how and when Bleeding Fingers music was being established.
Sure. I mean, I was with Hans as an assistant for 5 years, and then I started working on the show Through the Wormhole with him. I'd say right around 2010. It may have been a year before, a year after, but around that time, Hans's business partner Steve Kofsky introduced me to Russell Emanuel, the CEO of Bleeding Fingers. And Russell and Steve, you know, Russell comes from the extreme music world. He created that company with a guy by the name of Dolph, and Russell and Steve Kofsky had this idea of having kind of like a composer collective that that kind of, you know, Hans was so busy with film projects, and a lot of times there'd be TV things kind of floated to him as opportunities, and Russell thought that with his own contacts at Extreme, and also at the time Extreme was owned by Sony, that if Russell and Steve Kofsky / Hans Zimmer paired up to create this composer collective, it could really be something special. And Steve was excited about it, and Russell was excited about it. They just didn't have anyone to write music for them, and so I was the guinea pig. Steve introduced me to Russell. Russell said, "Let's kind of try this thing out where I use my contacts at History Channel, and we get a show, and you write a micro library of 30 tracks for that show, and we see how that formula, how it works out. It's not exactly providing a moment by moment underscore, but it's creating bespoke, kind of tailored to the program collection of cues that really run the gamut emotionally, and provide editors that usually are cutting in library tracks a more like I said, a more custom tailored kind of micro library. And so I did that, and it went well. And so after that, essentially I was kind of the only bleeding finger for I think the first year, and I was just kind of like writing through the wormhole, going home and having dinner with my wife, and then coming back and like writing 2 tracks for Bleeding Fingers, and then in about a year's time, people just kept getting more and more. They warmed up to the idea, and a lot of work was coming in, so we built it out more, and Adam Schiff and Christian Lumberg joined the team, and I kind of got a couple additional writers under me to kind of help keep my output up while doing Through the Wormhole, and it kind of organically grew from there.
And yeah, I mean, you're absolutely no stranger to scoring documentaries. I mean, Through the Wormhole, which you mentioned, Planets, Blue Planet 2, and eventually Seven Worlds, One Planet. And these scores, Jacob, really emphasize the significance of music in a documentary. And could you please tell me how you got involved with Seven Worlds, One Planet, which was released by the BBC?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it really goes back to around, I think, 2015. Russell and his relationship with some of the music people at the BBC was able to get us a spot on the pitching team for Planet Earth 2. And so we submitted a demo. Joshua Klebe and me submitted a demo. And we really, really thought that was not, that we were a very, very remote, slim possibility. And so we kind of did not what we expected them to want, but what we thought was going to be the most interesting way to kind of score a series like that. And the response we got was really positive, and we wound up scoring that together. A lot of the directors from Seven Worlds were actually episode directors on Planet Earth 2, and so we had such a good experience with them that when Seven Worlds came around, because I guess the BBC is a government entity, they can't just say we're gonna favor this person that we've worked with before. They kind of make you pitch every time, and so Hans and I, he wrote the theme for Planet Earth 2, and we worked on Blue Planet together, and we kind of go way back. So we came up together with a very kind of simple theme that we thought would kind of tie the continents together, and we presented that theme to the BBC as a pitch, and they really responded to it, and so it was ours to lose at that point. And so that's kind of how it came about.
Right, that's fantastic. And Jacob, how do you find the right sound or cue on a documentary which deals with nature, various continents, and animals?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because a lot of my background is at least in the early days was writing additional music on feature films, and I felt like the best approach for these, and it seems to resonate with the directors and the producers, is to always kind of put yourselves in the animal's position and play the emotion that you think they would be feeling, and that's the guiding principle. I don't necessarily say, oh, okay, there's a mouse, so we definitely need like a bassoon or something. It's like what is this behavior that we're witnessing, and what are the stakes, and is it him finding love, or her finding herself in this terrible uh, calamity of a situation where there are two predators kind of going after them, and that ultimately dictates kind of where I land tonally, and and the instrumentation stuff is really just it is like icing on the cake. Like for Antarctica, it just felt like really glassy, kind of still textures. I also don't differentiate between electronics and organic instruments. I kind of, whatever complements each other in a way that I find is interesting, I'll use. Like nothing's off limits. Anything that kind of evoked a kind of still and maybe even brittle kind of tonality, or timbral quality, I would deploy it on Antarctica, and similarly, I kind of find other sorts of musical personalities for the other continents.
Great. I mean, that must have been quite a challenge here, Jacob. I mean, writing or collecting ideas for each episode or each different continent, Antarctica, which you mentioned, or also Africa. Could you tell me a bit about the individual episodes and the cues and how do you approach that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was a tremendous challenge, and I've got to say that working on these sorts of series is like it's going to be the highlight of my career, regardless of what comes after this, simply because it's just so fulfilling to be involved on something that I care deeply about, which is conservation, and something where it's kind of putting out in a form of entertainment, a way to kind of educate people about things that they might not see every day, and and kind of make a kind of plea for them to kind of pay attention to what's happening in our world, which is, I mean, with Blue Planet, and it effectively, leading to a banning of plastic straws in the UK, was just like surreal to me, that something that I had a small part in could have a real kind of effect on the world. It's just there's nothing like working on these series. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the different episodes, there's the macaques in Europe at the Rock of Gibraltar, and they kind of live really close to civilization, and they're kind of doing all these acrobatic maneuvers on these kind of power line structures, and like real man-made kind of things, and it just looked like a Bond film. You know, the Bond stuff often happens in, the locations are often in Europe, and so that was like a huge like dream come true to be able to like I can't remember what the title is. John Powell did this kind of crazy piece in one of the Bourne Identity movies that just is like a blistering orchestral piece, and you're like holding on for dear life. And so I kind of took inspiration from that for that sequence, and just had a lot of fun with it. And in North America, it was really kind of important to put, hints of Americana and like super detuned upright pianos throughout the score. It felt like a place to not, dive in the tropes necessarily in terms of like, slide guitar and things like that, but a way to kind of play music earnestly with instruments that are that kind of bring up an American sensibility. And one of my favorite cues from that was the Fireflies sequence, which I just couldn't get over how the photography, how great it was.
Oh,
it just
yes.
looked so remarkable.
Yeah.
And I went into this kind of pointillistic place, but also with a kind of, a fantasy bent to it. So it wasn't like I was, putting notes on the piano roll with that mimic the light movements, though I tried that, and there's some kind of relics of that approach in the final piece, but it was just something that was so beautiful.
Yes.
And I spent a great deal of time trying to make sure that musically I was hopefully on the same playing field as the visuals. Like that was the challenge, was like making the music as beautiful as I could make it so that it kind of didn't feel out of place when you're watching this imagery. It was about kind of making each continent feel like it had an internal logic to it in the score, but without necessarily, painting it in a stereotypical way of like I said before, tropes and things that you would expect, but using instrumentation in a very deliberate way to kind of paint each continent as a kind of different thing from the other.
Absolutely. You're so right. I mean, and watching the final product, watching the individual episodes, it's so tremendous and astounding. And especially when you're watching it on, let's say, Blu-ray or 4K Ultra HD, it really knocks your socks right off. It's so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, how they capture that stuff is just, it's, I'm in on the process to an extent, and even it still bewilders me, having done 3 of these, that they're able to capture this behavior with such clarity and such artistry. It's a marvel. It doesn't get old or tired. It's just remarkable footage.
Absolutely.
And storytelling. I mean, the kind of like the behaviors, they every director is, or I'd say most directors anyway, are also, PhDs, and they have a large network of scientists that they communicate with that are like discovering some of these oddities and interesting new behaviors that kind of tip them off, like, hey, we just left this island, and you wouldn't believe that this thing was happening, and so they get a film crew and they go out there, and oftentimes they're kind of at the forefront of reporting, that this behavior exists to the masses.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible stuff.
We just mentioned the cinematography and the whole setup of the series. And what do you think inspired you the most, or where do you get the inspiration from? Is it, watching just one shot or one picture, one still, so to speak, or do you just watch a couple of seconds of one, let's say, an animal in motion, perhaps? Where do you, or how did you find an idea which you then flashed out into a full cue?
It's a good question. I think, I try and pick a moment in each episode as a jumping off point. And there are many remarkable moments in every episode, but like I'd say, the first cue I did for North America was the Canadian lynx cue, because it just the imagery of the snowfall and this cat trying to hunt a rabbit in the snow. It just the footage. I just thought, I don't know what it was about it, but I'm just I try and go on my reactions, like whatever it kind of makes me sit up in my chair. Whether it's the behavior or the cinematography or a combination thereof. I mean, certainly the firefly sequence in that episode, that was the next on my list, and I'd say a lot of times I would just have a still up of it, because it was more about like the place. Okay, not more about. I'd say it was just as much about the place and the time of day that they shot that stuff in, that I was trying to kind of take in through osmosis almost. uh, and and the images were, the moving images were important as well, but I was really just trying to kind of anchor the piece around how I felt looking at at that scenery at dusk. It's such a beautiful,
Yes.
just such a beautiful image. And yeah, I mean, in the Asia episode, the golden snub-nosed monkeys, I I didn't even I had a similar feeling about the razor snakes in Planet Earth 2, which was like I just didn't even, it didn't need music. It was just amazing. And I couldn't watch that scene enough because it was just so novel to me. I just, like, I'd never seen anything like it. And so scenes like that stay with me. I start there, and then depending on further conversations with the director, and what they want to get out of the arc of the episode, I kind of then work on either side of that scene,
Yes.
until I fleshed it out.
Jacob, thank you so very much for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate that. I had such a great time talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed the
Likewise.
conversation too.
Yeah, I did very much so, and yeah, I very much enjoyed it, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk.